All right, so welcome to our half day of mindfulness with Joyful Mountain Sangha. Just going over one of the sutras that are essential teachings of the Buddha, and this can be found in Thich Nhat Hanh's Awakening of the Heart. It's a very detailed commentary on some of the core sutras that we find in the Buddhist practice. Some sutras that Thich Nhat Hanh just felt like were essential for our particular practice in this tradition. One of which we'll be talking about here, which is the Sutra on the Full Awareness of Breathing. This sutra is the first sutra in the book. I believe it's because it's foundational to our practice, and because, as things go in the Buddhist practice, is that it's very interconnected with other sutras and philosophies. So it doesn't exist on its own. Even though we go through each one of the 16 practices of breathing, there's actually a lot more going on behind the scenes and how it's related to some of the other practices and sutras. One of which, four foundations of mindfulness, is also woven into this sutra. The Diamond Sutra is woven into this sutra, as well as other philosophies such as the Doors of Liberation, the Dharma Gates or Seals, and the Four Noble Truths. So, to be able to present on this sutra, I have to really just kind of keep it succinct and not go in and drift into some of these other uh, topics or readings or philosophies. So just keeping it very centered on the full awareness of breathing. A bit of a background on this sutra is that it took place in Shravasti, just in the foothills in the Himalayas there. Lots of history with Shravasti, went through a lot of ups and downs over time. It was the capital of the ancient kingdom of Kosala, where the Buddha lived most after his enlightenment. It is near that Nepalese border and was a junction for three major trading routes in ancient India from 5th century BC to 12th century CE. And it was destroyed and covered with mounds after the incursion and establishment of a Sunni Muslim kingdom under the rule of Muhammad Ghor's army, mainly composed of Turkish slaves of the Islamic world called Mamluks. Shravasti was the home of King Prasenajit and the wealthy donor Ānāpānasati, who offered the Buddha his Jetavana grove. The sutra states that the Buddha had decided to stay in Shravasti an additional month in order to motivate the practice of his disciples. He was accompanied by senior practitioners such as Ananda, Shariputra, Moggallana, and Mahakasyapa, who later became the first patriarch after the Buddha's death. Each of the Buddha's senior disciples were training between 10 to 40 bhikkhus at a time. Buddha stated that the community was a field of merit that avoided useless and boastful talk. He praised the progress of some of the disciples who realized the fruit of arahatship and never returning to the cycle of birth and death. He also recognized those who had uprooted the first 5 of the 10 internal formations, including caught in a wrong view of self, hesitation, caught in superstitious prohibitions and rituals, craving, hatred, and anger. He goes on to list several other practices before teaching the full awareness of breathing to the bhikkhus who are present. And he attributes this sutra as a method to become successful in the 4 establishments of mindfulness, which in turn lead to the success in the 7 factors of awakening. He recommends going to any deserted place, sitting in the lotus position with a straight back, and practicing these steps. As I mentioned earlier, there are 16 ways of breathing. Jenny walked us through those in the meditation. But it's not just that. As we see here that the 16 ways of breathing are divided into 4 categories. So each of these 4 categories has 4 breathing practices. These 4 categories correspond to the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Completely other sutra. So we're not going to go too heavy into it, but just a quick overview. You can see on that right-hand side. First, we are contemplating the body, moving into this gross sensation, the physical sensation of form. Then we're moving into feelings, and we talk about feelings here. It's not like anger, hatred, sadness, happiness, yada, yada. It's pleasant, unpleasant, neutral feelings. And then as we label these and work with these feelings of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, we start to move into the mind itself. The mind itself is observations of the states of mind or mental formations, as we sometimes call them. But these involve things like greed, hatred, delusion, happiness, joy, etc. But we are trying to cultivate the garden of the mind here, observing certain formations that arise, like grows like a plant out of the soil. And we pay attention to it, try to look deeply into it, return it back into the soil. And we are cultivating and trying to water certain seeds in our garden that give rise to feelings like joy, happiness, and peace. But it's said here that when you walk through these 16 ways of breathing and incorporate these into your life, peace, joy, and happiness just naturally arise out of the garden of the mind without hardly any effort. The last piece of this is the contemplation of phenomena. What we mean here is the flow of information between the body, the senses, and what's happening out there in the external world. The relationship between what I perceive as me and all the dharmas or things out there in the world. And the senses are kind of the gatekeepers for that flow of information. It's like the glue in the relationship between internal and external. And what we start to find is that when we look deeply at that relationship in this last step, we're starting to see that one cannot exist without the other. Subject and object are actually the same. So this last piece gets really heavy. So when we talk through the 7 factors of awakening, this last quarter of the 16 ways of breathing is going to take a little bit more of a focus in this talk. So here are the 7 factors of awakening for those who do not know what they are, what they look like. It all starts with mindfulness, and then it cascades from there. The energy of mindfulness is flowing towards the body and mind. This waterfall into 6 additional categories, and the 16 breathing practices serve as the direct engine that ignites, develops, and matures these 7 qualities of an enlightened mind in a precise order. Although in Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, he might say that these kind of weave in and out of each other like a web. So these 7 factors of awakening in of themselves would require a completely separate talk. So I'm not going to dive into these. However, they are incorporated into this next slide here, presented in the book called 7 Ways of Practice. So first, I'm going to break these up into 3 different categories of each, but like each one of these 7 steps all involve the 4 foundations of mindfulness, 7 factors of awakening. And when we get to the 7th step here, That involves the Diamond Sutra. So that's where it gets a little heavy. So the first step here, following the breath in daily life, this is anchoring the mind, creating harmony between breath and body. So when the world around us feels chaotic, Buddhism teaches us to return to this simplest, most stable anchor we possess, our breath. And then following the breath, calming our breathing acts as a stabilizer. And when the mind wanders or feels restless, bringing our focus back to the breath immediately can ground us in that present moment. Bringing awareness to the body can actually generate healing. Now, we often ignore our physical bodies because we're so busy going to and fro and doing this and that and checking the boxes. But by directing our breath, attention, and gratitude to specific parts of ourselves, just like we did with the Yoga Nidra practice that Katie just gave us, they're creating some space for healing. It's like, oh, the body can finally get a moment to address some maybe serious issues occurring within the body that wasn't able to earlier because of all the stress and the going and the doing. Now we have a holy trinity here that involves body, mind, and the breath, all functioning in harmony with each other. So when the body relaxes, the restless waters of the mind naturally become still. And true practice is about relearning how to deeply rest. Forgot how to do that. I know sometimes when I go camping out in the woods, out of some miracle, I end up sleeping for 10, 12 hours at a time, finding out that, wow, maybe my body just really needed to rest. And just never gave it that opportunity because there's so much that I needed to do in this busy world. And as fourth step, we're nourishing ourselves with joy and happiness. But what does that mean? It means we should celebrate our bodies as miracles of creation before they inevitably return back to the earth. By looking deeply, we realize we already have more than enough conditions right now to be truly happy. Even when it seems like the rest of the world is falling apart or the house is on fire, there's still things to be grateful for that we have. Next piece of this is navigating through the mind, working with thoughts and feelings. So what do we do when unpleasant emotions arise? Our instinct is often to fight or suppress them, but Buddhist psychology invites a much more gentler approach. We're observing our feelings. When difficult emotions or physical discomfort surface, we do not push them away. That's not the key here. Instead, we shine the light of awareness on those feelings. Thinking of a glass of muddy water here, if you keep stirring it, it just stays cloudy. But if you just let it sit, the mud settles and the water becomes clear. Meditation gives us the space to observe our triggers so we can choose how to act rather than simply reacting. And try to imagine a river of thoughts, this endless rushing river. The practice is to climb out of this river and stand on the bank, watching the thoughts drift past without getting swept away by them. Find the spaces between your thoughts and let the internal noise fade into the background. So what does it mean to liberate the mind? It means liberating ourselves and untying the hidden knots of past trauma that feed our daily anxiety. Like the Bodhisattva Manjushri, we must wield the sword of insight to slash through the false narratives we tell ourselves about who we are. And we find ourselves moving into this seventh step here, looking deeply, noticing impermanence in the illusion of the self. This final, deepest layer of this practice pushes us to examine the very nature of reality, drawing wisdom from profound teachings like the Diamond Sutra, finding that reality is actually in flux at all times, changing constantly. From the cells dividing in our bodies right now to stars igniting in distant nebulas, impermanence is not a sad reality. It is a message of hope that allows life to renew and continue. Thich Nhat Hanh uses an example of synthetic bait, something that we chase after constantly throughout our lives. These external symbols of happiness, bigger houses, university degrees, advanced electronics, larger bank accounts. The text compares this endless chasing to a fish biting onto synthetic bait with a hidden hook, or hastily drinking salt water to quench your thirst. True happiness is a transformation of the mind itself, not something you buy or achieve externally. The self is actually interconnected with all things. So Buddhism challenges the rigid boundary that we typically draw between me and the rest of the world, the individualism. In truth, we are completely woven into the ecosystem. The minerals inside my bones were once part of the earth. Symbolically, we have all been a rock in the vast history of time. When we drop our greed and stop worrying so much about our own self-importance, we dissolve the boundaries between living and non-living things. Everything you are seeking is already here. Now that we know the true nature of all dharmas, all things, it is finally time to stop running. You might think, well, Zach, that's all well and good, but how am I supposed to apply any of this to my life practically? I put together 4 simple steps here that might help a bit, but just to provide an example. A few weeks ago, I was driving down from Flagstaff on the freeway and minding my business. I even had cruise control on. I was on the fast lane. It's going a few miles an hour over the speed limit. A little risky, I know. I like to live on the edge of life sometimes. In any case, a driver came up behind me. All the other lanes were empty, by the way. But this guy came up right against my bumper. He was flashing his lights and honking. I was looking in my rearview mirror what was going on. This guy was waving his hands to and fro, like, get out of the way. And I was like, I'm good, man. Like I'm going fast, but not too fast. Therefore, I feel like being in the fast lane is totally fine. And I was like, if he has an issue with it, there's 3 other lanes there for him to take if he wants. Well, The option that he chose was to speed up around the side of me, and then he pulls right in directly in front of me and slams on the brakes. Right? A lot of folks here in the Zoom room are from the Phoenix area. Chances are you might encounter this almost on a daily basis. This isn't anything new for y'all. So, of course, I have to slam on my brakes so I don't hit the guy. And then he speeds up to, I think it was over 100 miles an hour. But I was really upset and I reacted in that moment. I can tell you a lot of feelings came up. I'll specify unpleasant feelings. And I was like, whoa, this guy just messed with the wrong driver. So lead foot on the gas. I started chasing after him. And he was going super fast, so I was going super fast. Again, probably over 100 miles an hour. I said to myself, I was like, wait a second. Just had this bit of a flash where I was like, what am I doing? Like, what is this supposed to accomplish? What am I going to do if I catch up to the guy? What does that mean? What's going to happen then? And so I thought to myself, like, let's kind of ease off of this a little bit. I started slowing down. I slowed way down. Started getting into the slow lane. I'm just kind of breathing a bit. Sat back in my chair, hands still on the wheel, but just kind of like really breathing deep in and out, trying to calm my nerves. That flash of insight I had was kind of like, wait, what am I supposed to do here if I catch up to this guy? What's the goal? What's the aim here? That flash of insight is what helps us stop in that moment and take a step back. Believe it or not, the ability to stop when emotions are starting to rise is a superpower that not a lot of people have. They have access to it, but they have to be able to practice with that, to build that muscle, to practice with insight, to practice with slowing down, which is what we do here in our days of mindfulness, right? When we practice together every Saturday, creating space. So step one is that when the stress hits, the body can first react with some shallow breathing and tight muscles, right? The idea here is to pause, stop what we're doing, breathe in and find that physical tension in the body, and then release it, breathing out. Consciously soften the shoulders, the jaw, the hands. That was me when I was sitting back in my driver's seat. I was like, okay, and then relaxing instead of white knuckling it on the driver's wheel. And step two, we're transitioning now. And we're trying to get to a place where we can incorporate some methods into our breathing. So the training wheels here is we can count the breaths. 1, 2, breathing in, out, up to 10. And if we lose track, bring it back to 1. Gentle reset without judging ourselves. And then once we get to a comfortable spot, we can drop the numbers. The mind settles, just following the continuous line of air, breathing in and out. Observing that breath in the body like a parent watching a child on a playground. And then the physical anchor, narrowing the focus to the exact physical point where we feel the breath most clearly Usually that's the rim of the nostrils or the upper lip, feeling the cool air coming in and out. Cool air coming in, warm air going out. And then the space between the breath, space between the thoughts. Start entering stillness, paying close attention to the silent pause at the very end of the exhale, right before the next inhale begins. Resting the mind in that brief moment of stillness, stretching that tiny pause, naturally sliding into the quiet states that precede some deeper states of mind. Now, stress triggers a flood of difficult emotions, like frustration or anxiety. We can simply label them. Oh, this is overwhelm. Oh, this is stress. This is frustration. Now I'm noticing peace. Now I'm noticing calm. So we're de-escalating, breathing out slowly to lower the heart rate, soothe the emotion, treating the feeling as a temporary storm, not a permanent state. Now we're checking in with the mind in step 3. And stress can distort the thinking, making problems look often bigger than they are. And notice if the mind is racing or trapped in a loop. And center it, using a single deep breath to pull the focus back into the current room, wherever you're seated, wherever you're standing. Letting go of the frantic what if thoughts on your next exhalation, not getting trapped in catastrophizing. Just let all those thoughts go. Don't get caught into that story. Similar to that synthetic bait that Thich Nhat Hanh was talking about earlier, don't get hooked by that storyline or that narrative that takes us into these worst case situations. Let that exhalation allow us to let go of that. The last step here is shifting the perspective to change how you view the stressful situation, to strip away its power. And zoom out. Remind yourself that this stressful moment is just temporary. It's impermanence. Drop the fight. Stop resisting the reality of the busy day and just letting it go. And then this hard reset that occurs, finding that pocket of stillness before responding to the next task, responding to the situation. This is another way of incorporating cessation. Ceasing reacting to a trigger that could end up taking us down a path that could be detrimental for me and probably for the other driver. Maybe some other people on the road too. But you can see how these steps can be applied in everyday situations, even outside of traffic. Now, some of the deeper states of mind that I was mentioning earlier, we're not going to go over these because, again, it's like a whole other class. But Thich Nhat Hanh details in his commentary these 9 attainments of right concentration. These are another way of incorporating the breathing exercises, and they were more popularized in the Mahayana tradition and in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. But Thich Nhat Hanh's aim here is to try to keep the teachings as simple as possible, going back to the foundational exercises and teachings. So he attributed these nine attainments as something that came later after the Buddha's passing. And so he kind of left these alone and said, let's not deal with all of this. Let's just go back to the 16 exercises and the full awareness of breathing. So thank you all for listening through that talk about the sutra. And I hope that you found it informative. Hope that I didn't confuse people too much. It's taking something that is very big and trying to make it in a way that's presentable in the most accessible way possible. So hopefully I achieved that for you. And I'm happy to open it up for further sharing. I'm going to have Linda take over that piece and kind of go through some of our guidelines. So thank you so much for sitting through this with me. This is Zach bowing out.